Once upon a time in the modern world, a place brimming with curated lives, filtered fantasies, and endless yearning for a love that feels like magic. There lived a woman who believed with all her heart that love was supposed to rescue her. Not build her, not challenge her, rescue her. She was accomplished in many ways, smart, capable, even admired by others. But when it came to love, she waited. Waited for someone to come along and lift the burden of existing. Someone to take care of her heart, shield her from pain, and complete her. She called it romance. She called it destiny. But in truth, it was escape. This is not a fairy tale, and she is not the only one. In fact, many women, intelligent, grown, seemingly independent, carry within them a hidden belief that the highest form of love is to be chosen, protected, worshipped, and saved. Not to be equal, not to be a companion in the struggle of life, but to be adored and taken care of. We call it the princess complex, and it wears 1,000 faces. Sometimes it looks like the woman who falls for the emotionally unavailable man, believing her love will unlock his soul. Sometimes it's the woman who sabotages her own potential, hoping to remain soft enough to be desirable, never threatening, never too much. Other times, it's the woman who chooses helplessness as currency trading agency for affection. It doesn't matter how successful she is in her job, how many books she's read, or how progressive she sounds in conversation. Deep within, if her emotional narrative is still built around the need to be saved, she remains trapped. Not in sweetness, but in arrested development. But how did we get here? How did so many women become emotionally conditioned to long for rescue instead of transformation, for devotion instead of mutuality? To understand this, we must look beyond the surface of psychology and dive into the unconscious structures. Carl Jung spoke of the archetypes, specifically the archetype of the princess and her shadow. The princess is an ancient figure. She is the maiden, the girl in the tower, the beloved of legends. She is desired, but passive, beautiful, but powerless, symbolic of potential, but not yet realized. She waits. She sings. She dreams. But she does not move. The world must come to her. The danger must be fought for her. And above all, she must be loved not for who she becomes, but for who she already is. This is the emotional blueprint many women are raised with directly or indirectly. Through stories, culture, family roles, and expectations, girls are taught that the ultimate prize is to be chosen, not to choose, to be claimed, not to claim themselves. And so the modern woman, though raised in a world that tells her she can be anything, still feels that in love, she must be rescued. Not because she is weak, but because the idea of effort confrontation or emotional independence feels like rejection, like failure, like not being worthy of pure, unearned love. That is the seed of the princess complex. And it grows through a psychological mechanism Jung described in depth projection. Projection is when we cast aspects of our unconscious mind onto others, especially in intimate relationships. For a woman trapped in the princess archetype, projection becomes the way she turns a man into a savior, a king, a hero, not because he is, but because she needs him to be. She projects her longing, her wounds, her unclaimed masculinity, what Jung calls the animus, onto someone external. And then she waits. She waits for him to complete the story. But here's the twist: what she waits for is not really love. It's validation. Emotional dependence disguised as destiny. And men too are caught in this. Many unconsciously desire a woman who makes them feel powerful, needed, heroic. A woman who is small enough to make them feel big. This is the toxic polarity of unbalanced anima and animus. When our inner masculine and feminine are not integrated, we seek partners to fulfill roles we have not developed within ourselves. We don't fall in love with the person, we fall in love with our projection. That's why relationships rooted in the princess complex often start intensely romantic and end in confusion. She loved who she thought he could be. He loved the feeling of being needed. But real intimacy requires more than chemistry. It requires consciousness. and consciousness reveals the truth that no one can save you from yourself. The princess wants to stay innocent. She resists shadow work. She resists seeing her own manipulations, her own passive-aggressive control tactics, her own desire to remain emotionally childlike. She calls it softness, but it's fear. She calls it feminine, but it's fragility. She wants to be held, not held accountable. So how do we break this spell? How do we wake up from the fantasy of being saved and instead begin the work of saving ourselves? It begins with recognizing that the desire to be loved without growth is not love. It is nostalgia, a longing to return to the safety of childhood when affection was not earned but given freely. But relationships among adults are not childhood. They are mirrors, and the only way to have mature love is to become emotionally mature ourselves. This means facing the parts of ourselves we've denied. The manipulative girl behind the smile, the fear behind the flirtation, the dependency beneath the grace. It means reclaiming our animus, our inner masculine energy, not to dominate, but to balance, to make decisions, to speak truth, to hold boundaries, to show up for ourselves even when no one else does. It also means grieving the fairy tale, grieving the idea that someone will come and make it all okay, grieving the belief that if we are just sweet enough, pretty enough, good enough, we will be loved without ever needing to grow, grieving too the time lost in waiting. But on the other side of that grief is something far more beautiful than the fairy tale. It is the reality of being a whole person, a woman who chooses love not from need, but from fullness, a woman who no longer tries to shrink herself to be desirable, a woman who no longer seeks escape through affection, a woman who stops asking to be saved and instead chooses to be seen in all her humanity. That is what Jung meant by individuation, the process of becoming a complete self, not a half, not a role, but a full embodied conscious being who can relate to others not through projections, but through presence. And when you become that woman, something remarkable happens. You no longer attract partners who want to fix you. You no longer fall for people who trigger your wounds. You begin to resonate with people who see you, not your mask, not your fantasy, but your essence. And in that space, love is no longer a hiding place. It is a platform for expansion. So I ask you now in your deepest heart, do you truly want to be loved like a child? Or do you want to be respected like a sovereign woman? Because those are two very different paths. One keeps you in a tower waiting. The other hands you a sword and says, come down, there's a world to walk through, and you don't need a prince to walk it with you. There's a reason why stories of princesses being rescued still dominate our collective imagination. It's not because we're children. It's because the princess archetype represents something deep in the psyche, the longing to be seen as precious, to be chosen without effort, and to be kept safe from the harshness of the world. The real question is not whether the princess should be rescued, but whether she ever asked herself who she is beyond being rescued. In the psyche of many modern women, this question remains unanswered, not because they are unintelligent, but because no one taught them how to be both soft and strong, loving and sovereign, romantic and independent. The culture often presents a binary, be a nurturing doormat or a cold, strong woman who needs no one. But real maturity lies beyond these roles in the tension between dependence and independence, and in the ability to hold both love and responsibility simultaneously. Jung understood that these roles, the princess, the martyr, the lover, the rebel, are not who we are. They are archetypes that live in the collective unconscious. They are patterns. They are energy forms that possess us when we are unconscious. The princess in this sense is not a woman. She is a field of emotional reality. And when a woman's identity fuses with this archetype, she becomes unable to act from the self. She acts from the pattern. She waits instead of chooses. She hopes instead of heals. She clings instead of creates. And every disappointment, every betrayal, every heartbreak becomes another brick in the wall that keeps her dependent on affection, on validation, on being someone's fantasy, rather than her own truth. Let's talk about the animus now, the masculine counterpart within every woman, as Jung described it. The animus is not the external man. It's the internal principle of logic, action, clarity, and sovereignty. When a woman has not integrated her animus, she unconsciously projects it onto men. That's why so many women fall in love not with who the man is, but what he represents in their psyche. He becomes the projected container of everything she hasn't claimed in herself: direction, discipline, purpose, protection. And so she needs him not just emotionally, but symbolically. That's why breakups feel like death for these women, not because of the person lost, but because their symbolic structure collapses. They were using someone else to embody a part of themselves they had not yet met. And here lies the tragedy: when the animus is not claimed inwardly, it becomes tyrannical outwardly. The woman becomes addicted to chasing men who don't show up, obsessed with approval, panicked in the absence of contact, confused by emotional signals. It's not love, it's disembodiment. She has lost contact with her own internal father, her own clarity, her own decision-making power. And now she waits, not for love, but for reconnection with her own inner structure. This is why many women feel spiritually lost when single. Not because they are incapable, but because they have not yet built a relationship with the animus inside. And the animus, when undeveloped, can be dangerous. It doesn't remain silent. It becomes critical, judgmental, shaming. It whispers things like, "You're not worthy without someone," or "You'll never be enough on your own." This internalized voice often masquerades as intuition, but it is actually the unrefined animus acting out. Jung warned that the unintegrated animus could become a demonic force within the woman, causing her to sabotage relationships, idealize or demonize men, and lose touch with her creative power. The way out: conscious relationship with the animus. This means seeing where you project. This means asking, what part of him do I wish I had in myself? His confidence, his clarity, his stillness, his leadership. Then begin to cultivate those qualities inwardly, not to reject men, but to meet them as equals. It's also important to understand the emotional choreography that keeps the princess complex alive. It often begins with romantic intensity, a deep infatuation, a sense of being seen finally. But beneath that is a contract: I will be beautiful, agreeable, and emotionally compliant if you promise to never leave me. It's a contract signed in silence, a contract of unconscious need. But no one can hold that agreement forever. And when the partner begins to show imperfection, withdraw, or ask for accountability, the mask begins to crack. That's when the princess turns to protest. She cries, she withholds, she manipulates subtly, not out of evil, but out of terror. Her emotional survival was tied to being loved. Without it, she feels annihilated. This is where projection begins to collapse. What was once my hero becomes "you abandoned me." What was once "you're the one" becomes "you're the reason I suffer." But the man was never the source. He was the mirror. And mirrors do not lie, they reflect. Let's pause here and ask a hard question. Why is it so hard for women to release this fantasy? Why is the identity of someone worth saving so addictive? The answer in part is trauma. For many women, especially those who grew up with emotionally unavailable or critical fathers, the desire to be chosen by a man becomes the way they attempt to resolve childhood pain. They believe, if I can get this man to love me fully, I will finally prove I am worthy. I will finally rewrite the past. But love is not a court trial. It is not where you seek verdicts of innocence. Love is where you bring your wholeness, not your lawsuit. The princess complex is often rooted in father wounds. Jung explored this deeply in his work on the father archetype. The unmet longing for a protective present father can turn into obsessive love for unavailable men. Not because they are good, but because they feel familiar. They activate the same emotional template. And so the woman returns to the scene of the original wound, hoping for a different outcome. But trauma loops don't heal through repetition. They heal through integration. And integration begins when the woman stops asking, "Why won't he love me?" and starts asking, "Why do I need him to?" This is the true breaking point. when the fantasy of being saved finally collapses, and the woman meets herself not as a victim, not as a seductress, not as a dreamer, but as a sovereign adult who has needs, flaws, desires, and power. This is the death of the princess. And every true woman must go through it. She must mourn the loss of being adored simply for existing. She must let go of the idea that love means never doing the hard work. She must surrender the belief that emotional safety is owed, not earned. Only then can she step into her deeper femininity, not the childlike dependency of the maiden, but the grounded radiance of the queen. The queen is not without emotion. She is not cold. But she does not outsource her worth. She does not perform for affection. She does not wait for anyone to validate her path. She loves deeply, but not desperately. She receives, but she also gives. She speaks truth not to manipulate, but to liberate. She partners with men not as a fantasy object, but as a fully embodied woman. That is the true counterpart to the mature masculine, not a princess, but a queen. Not a girl seeking safety, but a woman offering sanctuary. This transformation from princess to queen is the essence of feminine individuation. It is the alchemical journey of reclaiming the projected animus, integrating the shadow, and choosing sovereignty over seduction. And it is available to every woman who dares to ask not, "Who will save me?" but "Who am I when no one is coming?" She begins to see it now not as a sudden revelation, but as a slow, burning recognition. That every man she had ever idealized was not a person, but a mirror. A surface she cast her hopes onto. A screen for her unconscious film. He smiled the way her inner child needed. He touched her as if she mattered. But he didn't really know her because she didn't know herself. This is the bitter medicine of consciousness. That much of what we call love is projection, and much of what we call heartbreak is the disillusionment that follows when the projection fails. Jung warned us that projection is a natural part of the psyche, but if it remains unconscious, it becomes fate. You will keep choosing the same story in a different body with the same ache, until you bring it to awareness, until you reclaim what you've lost in yourself. What have you lost? Perhaps your voice stifled beneath sweetness, your anger shamed into silence, your instincts drowned beneath longing, your animus projected outward, leaving you inwardly hollow. The princess doesn't just wait for love, she gives away her soul to earn it. She becomes what she thinks they want. She edits herself. She glows softly, just bright enough to draw attention, but never enough to threaten. She dances the edge of visibility seen, but not too much. And in this performance she forgets what it feels like to be whole. It's not just romantic. The princess complex bleeds into every part of a woman's life. At work, she avoids leadership not because she lacks capacity, but because she fears being disliked. She is the one who apologizes too often, even when she's right. She wants to be liked more than she wants to be free. In friendships, she plays the passive one, the pleaser, the quiet listener, never quite taking up space. And on social media, she curates softness as a brand. She leans into vulnerability, but never the kind that disrupts. It's a vulnerability that attracts comfort, not transformation. A helplessness that earns hearts, not growth. But the world does not reward innocence forever. Eventually, life calls her to depth, to complexity, to mess. And this is where she feels betrayal, not because anyone lied to her, but because she lied to herself. She believed she could stay small and still be fulfilled. She believed someone else would carry her unmet needs. She believed being loved was more important than being real. And when that house of mirrors collapses, she is left alone, face to face, with the one person she's been avoiding all along herself. This moment is sacred. This is the beginning of true womanhood, not in age, but in essence. She may feel lost, ashamed, even broken. But what's actually happening is initiation. She is being invited to meet her own center, to withdraw the projections, to call back her power. And that means grieving not just men or relationships, but identities. The girl who once thought love was safety. The girl who thought she had to be perfect to be chosen. The girl who lived in fantasy because reality felt too sharp. Let her die. Let her return to the soil of your becoming. Jung taught that to reclaim the self, we must integrate the shadow, the parts of us we repress, deny, or reject. For the princess, the shadow often contains anger, ambition, sexuality, sovereignty, clarity. These were cast out to maintain likability. But they are the very qualities that will set her free. She must now go into the cave where those parts wait, not to destroy her femininity, but to deepen it, to make it fierce, to make it real. The animus will not integrate easily. He has become wild from neglect. He shows up as inner criticism, self-doubt, or perfectionism. He whispers sabotage. But if she can sit with him, listen, and earn his trust, not by pleasing him but by claiming him, then he begins to soften. He begins to become an ally. And when her inner masculine returns, she no longer needs to chase it outside. She becomes both river and rock, fluid and grounded, feeling and focused. This internal wholeness changes everything. It reorients her relationships, not from dependence, but from desire. Not from fear, but from freedom. She no longer seeks partners to complete her. She seeks mirrors who reflect what she already owns. She is no longer afraid of being alone, not because she doesn't crave intimacy, but because she no longer fears herself. And in that shift, the very nature of love transforms. Love is no longer a fairy tale. It is a furnace, a place where two people bring their whole selves not to escape, but to evolve. And the woman who was once a princess learns to stand in the fire without demanding to be pulled out. She learns to speak her needs without guilt. She learns to hold space for others without abandoning herself. She learns to walk away not out of bitterness, but out of devotion to her truth. And she learns that intimacy is not being adored, it is being known. Known not just for what is pretty soft or pleasing, but for what is real. And what is real is this: you were never meant to be saved. You were meant to be met. And to be met, you must first arrive fully in yourself. Healing begins when illusion ends, not when everything is fixed, not when love returns, but when she finally stops confusing validation with value. The difference is subtle, but it is the very line between bondage and liberation. Validation says, I am lovable because you chose me. Value says, I am lovable because I choose me. This is the internal shift that dismantles the princess complex at its core. Because as long as a woman waits to be chosen in order to feel worthy, she will design her entire personality around appeal rather than authenticity. She will rehearse love instead of live it. She will become a mirror for others and a stranger to herself. The path forward is not about abandoning desire. It is about maturing it. Desire does not disappear when the fairy tale ends. It becomes deeper, more nuanced, more real. She no longer desires perfection. She desires presence. She no longer seeks rescue. She seeks resonance. She no longer hopes for someone to save her from herself. She hopes to share life with someone because she already knows herself. This is the rebirth of Eros, not the romanticized shallow hunger for validation, but the rich soul-deep longing for union between whole beings. And that kind of love can only exist after projection ends. Projection does not end all at once. It dissolves through awareness, through pause, through self-inquiry. When a woman meets someone and feels that immediate pull before she claims it as fate, she must ask, what part of me am I seeing in him? Is it his strength, or is it my disowned animus? Is it his stillness, or my unexpressed need for containment? Is it love, or is it memory? In asking, she slows the cycle. She gains vision. She begins to return to herself. And from that self, she can begin the work of reparenting her inner feminine, not to be rescued, but to be rooted. Jungian individuation requires the integration of opposites. For the woman with a princess complex, that means integrating the masculine within the animus, not as fantasy, but as function. She must become her own boundary, her own direction, her own protection. This is not about becoming masculine. It is about becoming whole, about ending the war between softness and structure, about embracing the full spectrum of her psyche. And as she integrates, she begins to feel a shift in her nervous system. What once felt terrifying solitude, self-trust, saying no, begins to feel like home. She discovers that she can survive the storm without begging for shelter. She can say no without guilt. She can let go without collapse. She can be with herself in silence and feel not abandoned, but anchored. And in that anchoring, the need to perform evaporates. She no longer dresses her wounds in lace. She no longer hides her rage beneath smiles. She no longer bargains with love. Instead, she stands. Not above others, but beside them, no longer needing to be lifted. No longer needing to be worshipped, only needing to be real. Realness becomes her new royalty, not the illusion of sweetness, not the currency of helplessness, but the quiet power of self-ownership. The queen has arrived not as a costume, not as a title, but as a lived frequency. She doesn't chase, she doesn't beg, she doesn't audition, she chooses, she collaborates, she builds, and when love finds her, it meets a woman, not a projection. It meets someone who has nothing to prove and everything to share. This love is no longer thrilling in its drama. It is sacred in its stability. It grows slowly rooted in mutual respect, not codependent longing. It thrives not on adrenaline, but on intimacy. It is a space where both partners are allowed to be flawed, to be human, to be evolving. And in that space, love becomes what it was always meant to be, not an escape from reality, but a deepening into it. But even now, echoes remain. The princess doesn't die in a single moment. She returns in whispers, in doubt, in fear, in fatigue. She asks, "Are you sure you're enough?" She worries, will anyone ever stay if you show too much? She wonders, wouldn't it be easier to just be adored again? And in those moments, the woman breathes. She thanks the princess for her service, for the dreams, for the longing, for the softness. But she does not obey her. She does not regress. She places a crown of presents on her own head and she continues. This is the long walk home. The return not to a tower or a ball, but to the inner sanctuary where her soul lives untamed and unperformed. And from there, everything changes. Her standards, her friendships, her career, her creativity. She no longer fits into spaces that require her to be less than she is. She no longer accepts love that demands she stay silent to be kept. She no longer uses charm as survival. She speaks, she creates, she lives. Not as a princess in need of saving, but as a sovereign in love with the truth. By now, the illusion is gone. The fairy tale has burned in the fire of awareness, and all that remains is what's real. Not romanticized, not cinematic, but honest. And honesty, though it rarely sparkles, is the most seductive force on earth. Because when a woman becomes honest with herself, the world no longer controls her. She no longer performs for acceptance. She no longer crafts her persona around what might be pleasing. She no longer asks, how can I make them love me? Instead, she asks, do I love who I become when I'm around them? This question changes everything. It reshapes her concept of intimacy. No longer does she view closeness as a transaction of adoration. Now intimacy is the space where her truth is allowed to breathe. It is where presence matters more than promises, where being known is more beautiful than being desired. And it is in this raw, exposed, uncurated place that the real woman lives, not the girl, not the role, but the one who has claimed every corner of herself. This woman doesn't fear rejection, not because it doesn't hurt, but because she knows she won't abandon herself to avoid it. She doesn't beg for loyalty, not because she expects perfection, but because she trusts that what is aligned cannot be lost. She does not cling to illusions, not because she is hardened, but because she is finally in relationship with life, not fantasy. And when she loves without bargaining, without shrinking, without seduction. She loves in the way Jung meant when he said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." Her love is a privilege, not a performance, not a product, not a plea, but a presence, an offering, an extension of her wholeness. And that kind of love does not ask for saving, it asks for witnessing. Witnessing the whole woman. The one who cries when no one's watching, who holds paradox in her bones, who carries both light and rage without apology. The woman who chose to stay with herself even when every fairy tale told her to wait for someone else. That is the kind of woman the world needs. Not more rescued maidens, but more warriors of the soul, more artists of truth, more lovers who love without losing themselves. And you reading or listening to this, you are invited, not to believe in this, but to become this. To look inside and ask, where am I still waiting to be chosen? Where am I still playing small in the name of being sweet? Where have I mistaken longing for love and fantasy for freedom? You are allowed to want love. You are allowed to want partnership, devotion, sacred connection. But let it be born from wholeness, not hunger. Let it be rooted in reality, not rescue. Let it begin with you, not as a condition of worth, but as a confirmation of presence. You are here, and that is enough. You are allowed to be both soft and wild, both desiring and discerning, both held and unshakable. You are allowed to love without losing yourself. You are allowed to end the performance. There is no crown waiting at the end of this journey. There is no applause, no glittering reward. Only yourself, your voice, your walk, your breath, your truth, and the sacred trembling power of having chosen your own becoming. The princess will whisper sometimes. She'll try to return dressed as nostalgia. She'll say, "Wasn't it easier to be adored, to be protected, to be passive?" And you will smile not with disdain, but with reverence. You'll say, "Thank you, but I no longer trade freedom for fantasy. I am no longer waiting to be loved like a child. I am ready to be met like a woman." Because in the end, this is the question that reshapes everything. Do you want to be loved like a child, protected, pampered, powerless? Or do you want to be respected like a woman, imperfect, powerful, and free? The answer is yours, and it begins now.